step on the scene, I'm ready to attack. Andrew Keen, yeah, he's the one to bash. Asking questions, no filter, just keeps on grinning. He's the man who's got the whole crowd spinning. Money, fame, success, it's all in his sight. He'll dig deep, expose you with all his might. No sugarcoating, he'll cut right through. Andrew King, he's the one to spew.
We're still in Munich at DLD 20th anniversary conference. Old friend of mine, he was here last year. I think I interviewed him last year. Kenneth Cukier, deputy executive editor at The Economist, and a man who is good both on the past and the future. Ken, what were you doing in January 2005?
January 2005, I was working at The Economist. I was a tech correspondent. I was writing about Microsoft and why it was doing so poorly. Would it ever get its mojo back? Steve Ballmer seemed to be running it to the ground, and the share price was languishing. There was companies like brand new companies were being founded and being snatched up that seemed to be ridiculous deals. You know, Google was vastly overpaying by billions of dollars for no-name companies that were useless, not going anywhere, like YouTube.
Yeah.
Like YouTube, famously like YouTube. But let us remember, YouTube didn't really have an economic model other than living off the largesse of Google's search revenue for advertisements up until really about 5 years ago when it started its subscription service. And now, of course, it's probably smashed apart all of cable and network television in terms of viewership. It did before, but now probably revenue is probably matching it as well, I'm going to guess, just because it's just so dominant that we take it as such a major platform like Netflix, like Amazon Prime, and like Hulu, and like all the others. But it had been very marginal, even for its first decade within Google. But at the time, big tech didn't exist. There was just simply tech. And in fact, the mental model at the time was to treat companies like Facebook, using the old term, and Google as startups that had just succeeded. They were no longer in the startup phase. But 2005, Google was only a public company for about a year. Went public, I believe, in 2004. So at the time, they were serious companies that were earning billions of dollars, but we hadn't seen them as becoming the foundation of the economy as they became. And that story itself is only about 5 years old. We're filming in 2025, basically because of the data economy. And it was actually COVID of the dematerialization, virtualization of work, life, and society, where their platform, they became a platform not of, say, searching information, but of the foundation of society, of how we get on and do things in all features of work and life. That's actually a relatively recent story. So actually the regulatory implications of that are totally new as well. In 2005, all the problems were smaller problems because the companies were smaller. Now that they're larger, and also we knew about the network effects, but we didn't know about the monopolizing effects or the oligopic effects that they have. That is a new story now, but you have to judge actions based on what you knew at the time, not on what you know later.
You are the author or co-author of one of the most successful and impressive books about the digital age since the last 20 years, Big Data. Did big data exist in 2005? Were we in the big data age, Ken?
What is it that William Gibson said? The future's already here, it's not evenly distributed. The answer was yes, we were, but not everyone knew it. In 2005, I had done an interview with someone at eBay that changed my life, and he basically said, we can control the amount of transactions that we get for listings, and if we want to get more products in it. And I said, I think you meant sales. Like, you can't control the amount of people who sell things on eBay. You can only, as a seller, you can only control the amount of people who buy things on eBay by what you do. And he said, no, we can control sellers. We're a little bit like a central bank, and we can, just as we control the money supply, we can push levers and move things to actually incentivize people in the right way to sell things as well. I said, what are you talking about? And then he actually revealed an entire dimension of how a platform would work, where you thought they were dealing with the customer coming in, but actually they were dealing with a multi-sided market, getting people to list things. So for example, if you've got a high value product, but it's hard to deliver it, you might send that person a box and also do a prepaid label with all they need to do is go online with a pickup time to simplify the process of listing it and also insuring it for them. In other words, you as the platform could actually do things to incentivize both sides of the market, not only the buyer to buy by maybe presenting it more and sending it, but the seller to list it by simplifying the pain points that you can tell they're experiencing. How would you tell they're experiencing it? Say the person wants to list a very expensive computer, but they all go to the place of how they have to find out what the computer is, how much memory it has, how fast it is, what year and model it is. Well, if you're finding out that everyone is getting to that page and then abandoning it and not listing their computer, you would say, well, maybe we should just have an ability where they can download this small little applet and we will automatically identify for them the specs of the computer. It would simplify their life and they won't be hung up and abandon the process at that step of the process. To do that requires collecting data and knowing information about the person. Suddenly, you're in the big data phase. You're in the big data era. You are a data company. You're not as a marketplace, you're not just simply a market maker. Okay. That conversation in which I understood that there was a universe of information about the information society, that absolutely everything we were doing was creating a data exhaust that you could parlay, that had a value, had a vital value that you could parlay into new products and services or optimizing existing ones as a business, changed my life. Because then I realized once you see it, you can't not see it everywhere. And suddenly many people in Silicon Valley had understood the big data story. There were statisticians, they were often in the hard sciences like physicists who then used their knowledge of physics and the physical world into knowing how to use algorithms and doing it in terms of data. DJ Patel, who's a famous data scientist, went from working for the Department of Energy and other government labs as a data guy, who then transformed that into running Facebook and LinkedIn, check Facebook, certainly LinkedIn, and others as a data scientist. In fact, he's one of the people who coined the term a data scientist. Scientist looks in a microscope, comes up with new theories of the universe, and then tests it, and then goes forward and adds to the stock of knowledge. The data scientist doesn't peer into a microscope, they peer into statistical spreadsheets, but they do the same thing. There's a research element to it to understand the human species and how we're doing things.
So Ken, is the big story of the last 20 years, and this might be a low-hanging fastball for you to knock over the fence. Is it the story of big data? Is that the headline in tech of the last 20 years? And not just of tech, perhaps more broadly in all of business and culture? Have we entered the world of big data without barely noticing it between 2005 and 25?
Well, Kurzweil has a good answer to that. When he tries to understand the trends of technology and where they're going, he starts dating it in the 19th century. And he looks at information processing from the printing press, and then he extrapolates the line further. And so that big picture helps us understand where things are going to get to, because he doesn't see the computer as a new technology relative to other ways in which we were able to record and transmit information. So the answer certainly is yes. Feigenbaum, one of the early, Edward Feigenbaum, early AI pioneers, said that the manifest destiny of computer science is computer intelligence, or artificial intelligence. And he's right about that. That's sort of the end result of computation, of turning everything into something that is amenable for a computer to interact with. So you had acetate film, you had digital photography, you had cars that were driven by humans, but the car becomes a computer on wheels, makes predictions, you now have self-driving cars. And so to do all of these things, you need data. there's definitely thinkers like Gary Marcus and others who say, hey, data is not going to be enough. Actually, I'm one of them. I spoke at DLD last year about apophatic theology, which is sort of a negative theology in which you have an insight not from information, but from silence, from the vacuity and the Greek kenosis, or emptiness, or hollowing out of information, the absence of information. Buddhist practices are all about that insight that comes from the quiet of the inside, rather than the noise of information around us. So you'll need more than just data. But if you need a place to start to try to optimize the world or understand it, data will be your friend. And so the story of the last 25 years, and maybe of since the age of reason and the age of enlightenment, is a story first of information and then of data. And now, of course, data, why we bring this up and I'm so confident about it, is because data is the foundation of artificial intelligence, and that's the innovation that's going to set off all other innovations. You're never going to have another innovation that's not created by AI, in the same way that it's hard to imagine that after the printing press there'd ever be some realm of knowledge that goes outside of the word that's communicated through broadcasting it, whether it's being by movable type or by radio or television.
Douglas Rushkoff, of course, you're very familiar with his work. He was on the show just before Christmas talking about AI as the first native app of the internet, and I think that's basically what you're saying. The traditional narrative is that there was a huge deal with generative AI. I don't know whenever it was, with the white paper, 2017, 2018. But are you saying, Ken, that in a way, generative AI was and I use this word carefully, was inevitable, that it one way or the other it had to come out of our age of data, of big data?
It's a good question. I don't really think, I'm not certain if anything is actually ever inevitable, but I'm not certain it's not. So let me leave the philosophical element aside. From a practical standpoint, I would, even if I dislike the term inevitable, I would say it probably is, right? If you're going to collect information and then make a prediction about what will happen tomorrow with it, you can be retrospective and look for things that are similar and therefore make a prediction of things that are similar. But you can use those same predictions and flip it around to predict something that doesn't exist, that didn't exist before. So it's not about identifying an image of a bird in a picture that looks like images of birds in pictures you've seen before, from an algorithmic standpoint, but generating an image of a bird based on those images of a bird that you've seen before. It was complicated. The technique, the idea of an adversarial network, right? The GANs, the generative adversarial part of the network, in which there's two networks fighting over each other of what it thinks is the right thing should look like, so that it optimizes to get a better thing than it would create otherwise. Those sort of innovations were required, and they were conceptual innovations, and we didn't even think about that way of approaching it when we were thinking, well, how would you possibly have a computer identify inside an image the contents of an image? Breaking it, short version, break it down into like graph paper grids, find out the edges, go into layers of abstraction of the contrast of the edges, of what the colors are, and then bring it all together, all in math, which is pretty astounding, at different degrees of detail, to identify that this is a human face, that this face is Asian and it belongs to Jerry Yang of Yahoo, and this face is not, it belongs to someone else, right? That's pretty astounding, Asimov's idea that any sufficient technology should be indistinguishable from magic. So it seems like it's magic. We didn't know that would be possible or how we would do it, but I would agree that there's an inevitability to the point that we would go from identifying to generating. And if we're generating images and we're generating text, what else will we generate? Of course, we're going to generate pathogens. Will we generate a new form of cellular structure around our bodies that is like Kevlar. And that way, instead of live shooter drills for kids in California, all you have to do is learn how to stand up and take the bullets so it doesn't damage the soft organs within, because your body is one Kevlar sheet. Your skin is as tough as steel. And that's just how we're doing it now. The Clara and the Sun has a beautiful sort of background plot line of the idea that the children all go through some sort of genetic engineering. One kid, it goes wrong a bit, and he's all very ashamed of it. So I think that will happen. Is it inevitable? It might be the right debate, it might be the wrong debate. It's definitely the time to have that conversation is with Scotch whiskey, not on camera.
Shall we say extremely likely. So if AI perhaps hasn't surprised you as Mr. Big Data, what's surprised you over the last 20 years? I know it's easy in 2025 to conveniently be retrospective, and hindsight, of course, is always 2020. But what should we be surprised with over broadly in terms of the last 20 years?
Great question. Two things have surprised me. I'm surprised with two things. The first one is speed. I remember having a sort of just a sense in my mind of how the speed with which things move and change, and when it gets sped up 10 or 100 times faster than you think like, whoa, whoosh, what happened there? Just not what I would have expected. So things that I would have imagined in 2005 that I would expect over the next, or say 2020, what I expect over the next 15 or 25 years. Before I die, I can imagine we'll do X, would happen 6 months later. And you're like, oh, whoa.
But didn't the Turflers write a book about that in the 80s or 90s?
The Future Shock. Edward and Alvin and Toffler.
So shouldn't we have expected that? And with Moore's law, speed continually speeds up.
Things can speed up, but if it's in parallel, and it's not in parallel like 2, but exponentially in parallel, then it might speed up still faster than you would have expected, right? So it's not like, maybe a way of framing it is you're on a Concorde, and you think, oh wow, I'm going really fast, but you're forgetting that there's 8 billion other Concordes, and suddenly everyone has gone to a different place because some people went one place somewhere, someone went somewhere else. And so from an innovative standpoint, the fact that so much happened, if you remember 2023, the year of AI, there was really a foundational dimension every fortnight, right, where really the world was changing, right, with lots of new companies and ideas really coming out. And that was something that I wouldn't have expected. But I said there was 2 elements to it. One is the speed, okay, and maybe that's a shortcoming of me, right, in terms of speed. It's a perception one. The other one is the degree of vile in the world. You are laughing. I want to put on the record that you smirked and chortled. But let us stop and remember that there was a period of time in which there were basic foundational grounds of rules of decorous activity of how one human being treated another human being. Things that you just didn't do, right? At what age did a human being angry with another human not take out a fork and gouge the person's eye out as an acceptable way of handling a conflict? Like, when did that happen? Probably happened over a period of a couple centuries, but those centuries were probably like in Byzantium, right? I don't know, but we'll have a cultural evolutionist who will tell us that. So the same thing is happening online with words. Where if Andrew Tate thinks it's completely acceptable to mock in a rather odious, disgusting way, it happens to be a young woman, I think at the time was probably a minor, but even still, it shouldn't be a gender issue, whatever. But the degree which people are discourteous to each other, often in the most horrific ways, to me is unbelievable. the media, this is not because I'm in journalism, but just as one example, the media is under continual attack by armies of trolls. And when I get beaten up by people who are criticizing something I've done, which is very rare, just by the by, I had a media scholar tell me, Ken, you know what? If you were a woman at an American newspaper, they would have said the exact same thing, but they would have said that they were going to cut up your children and rape you and throw you in a ditch. And that happens all the time. The level of the same sort of odiousness of words gets amplified by men against women online, where they don't actually think that this is actually a harm, but it is a poison, and it poisons not just the person who receives it, but all of society and how we interact with each other. That, to me, is the most shocking thing that I've seen, because it's a betrayal of human dignity, but more importantly still, weirdly enough than that, it's a betrayal of the civilizing bonds that bring us together that were hard fought in the 16th century, which began with burning people as an acceptable way of dealing with disputes and ended with the acts of toleration, right? A period of time in which where society really became, I'll call it civilized, decorous, and gracious to one another. Political conflicts now could be argued over reason. The Queen's loyal opposition was a way in which you could challenge government, but not be actually disemboweled because it seemed like you were treasonous. The loyal opposition. So we found a way to interact and solve our problems by working together and disagreeing harmoniously and respectfully. If that phrase, we can't solve any of our other problems.
So you've come up with a good term, perhaps, to describe our age, a bilious age, the last 20 years between 2005 and 25. And thinking out loud, the one man who's surprised me, I think, certainly in 2025, who I could never have predicted or imagined, is Elon Musk. Not because of his wealth, but because of his biliousness and his overt biliousness, as if there were always parodies of people like Musk invented by the left, these evil capitalists bent on humiliating people. But it was always theory. Now it's actually practice. Is Musk a good example of this bilious age?
You know, it's an N of one. So yes, certainly, but it's not a Musk thing. I think the deeper question for me is it's an everyone thing. I guarantee you, I'm the sweetest man. I'm the nicest guy in the world. You give me, $500 billion, I'll be a jerk, right?
But are you a jerk on social media? Are you bilious yourself?
Pretty quickly I realized that this was doing something to me emotionally, and I got off it. It's not easy. It's like going on a diet. Like, it's hard, right? It actually betrays all of your instincts. But I was stunned by seeing people who are prominent public intellectuals who've got 1 million followers, getting some ridiculous comment by someone who's an egg at the time or has a few hundred followers and responding to it. It's like being at a stadium, right, like Wembley Stadium, the O2, to a massive stadium with 60,000 fans, and then having two people criticizing you up in the nosebleeding section, and then stopping everything and responding to those people. No, you just ignore it offline. So why online would you take your precious synapses and apply it to someone who's might be a robot, might be a troll paid by the Russians, or just might be a jerk? You would just ignore it, and you should ignore it. So I'm surprised people don't. I think we need to learn, this is going to sound Confucian, we need to learn a sense of self-control and uprightness. The mind is an excellent servant and a terrible master, and we need to control ourselves, and that's the foundation of building character. But nobody thinks about that anymore. What we have instead is a meaning crisis in which people are cast adrift and can't find any satisfaction in their lives, and particularly in their technology and in their relationships, because they've lost their relationships. Their technology is giving them sort of a universe unto themselves, and this concept of I'll call it uprightness. I agree, it makes me sound like an old fogey or a Confucian, but that's what it is, this sense of the dignity of myself and how I will treat others with that same dignity. That's archaic. I might as well be speaking. I might be writing in hieroglyphics.
What about the political element here? On the one hand, you've talked about this remarkable period of technological change, our age of big data, the speed. It's not just big data, it's biotech and many other technologies. On the other hand, in politics, we seem to have this regression to a 19th century age of nationalism and great power politics. Are they connected? Are these two moving staircases that seem to be going in entirely opposite directions? Are they, in a sense, driving each other?
Say that again.
Say what again?
The question, just so I can see the two staircases moving in different directions.
Well, the two staircases are this remarkable technological change, AI, big data, biotech. And on the other hand, the retreat to the old 19th century certainties of great power politics, of Ukraine, of Taiwan, of Greenland, of nationalism, of hostility to immigrants, of the cult of the soil, AFD, the Reform Party in the UK.
They are, but for I think reasons we're not humble enough to appreciate. And baked into your question is the answer, right? The technology is superficial. It's the veneer on top of something else. And what it's on top of is a timelessness of our humanity, our beauty, and our sublime exaltation, as well as our most base, craven, and disgusting elements. This is in 2025. There are people around today who are still alive, whose arms were tattooed. They were put into boxcars and sent to crematoria. They're alive. This isn't like Marcus Aurelius. This isn't the Egyptians. It's not some sort of prehistory that we've escaped from. They're still alive. But the thing that I find to be even more remarkable still is how Western-centric that is. Because there is ethnic cleansing going on in Africa right now. Literally this year. Sudan, Congo, Rwanda, Ethiopia. So the idea, the 20th century idea of tut-tutting and saying, what happened in World War II should never happen again. We need to protect that from happening again, is mocked by the idea that it wasn't against a particular class of people, then it happened to be people of the Jewish faith or race, but it was about human against human. How do we control I don't think we need to quote unquote control our humanity, because our humanity is not value driven. It's simply there is no natural order of dignity and rights and decency. We create that as a superstructure on top of who we are, just as we create our technology. So our technology can go in one direction, but we still are ourselves. We need that sort of self-reformation. We need a way of interacting with each other with tolerance and respect. We don't have to be nice if we loved each other, the Bible instructs it, but we definitely have to find a way to tolerate and respect and not kill each other. That's what's core, and I don't think we've figured that out. So whatever happens in our technology, that's great if it's superficial. We need to work on ourselves.
So Ken, we began this conversation with you talking in 2005. You were at The Economist, you still are. In 2005, you were looking at Microsoft and Steve Ballmer. In 2025, Microsoft remains one of the 2 or 3 most valuable companies in the world. Ballmer isn't around, but the guy who took over from his job is doing very well. Has anything really changed in the last 20 years when it comes to tech?
Totally. The biggest change was from optimism to pessimism. Before then, everyone was maybe naively, but they were certainly naively. They were looking at the best, and it looked like this was a whole new world. It was a new economy, but it was for the positive. It was very enfranchising. It was very empowering, and we all felt that although there was some canaries in the coal mine of people, Cassandra saying, "Hey, there's some problems you should worry about." Generally, remember Google solve the problem of like finding information, and it was free. So there was a lot of us remember paying for long distance phone calls, and WhatsApp allowed us to make phone calls, and it was free. You just downloaded the app. So we went from being incredibly positive about the future of technology, even though there was like the Evgeny Mozarovs and others who were saying, hey, that's tech solutionism and you should be wary, and he was right about that. We look at it today, and I think we've over-indexed, right? We've overcorrected by only seeing the negative. Now, it's healthy to now see the negative, if before we were too Panglossian and only saw the positive. However, we're losing sight of the positives within those negatives. So AI is a perfect example. There's many people who are just anti-AI, right? I don't think that's the right answer either. I think what we need is the right balance. But I will accept the fact that it's not irresponsible or wrong to be anti-AI, because the tech industry hasn't done itself any favors by being reprehensible in its practices. So let us remember at its core is we're driven by incentives and there's capitalism. Adam Smith presented that to us relative to a world of mercantilism in The Wealth of Nations. But that was his second book, and it was built on his first one, A Theory of Moral Sentiments. He always presumed that people were going to be motivated by doing the right thing because there was a degree of, I guess, this liberalism of respect and dignity afforded to other people and the right thing to do for your communities. When he spoke about free trade, it wasn't free from government regulation. Au contraire, it's just the opposite. It was going to take government to create free trade, free of the rentiers and the tariffs and the taxes and the royal privileges that acted as roadblocks from people doing what was in their interest and improving society thereby. What we need to go back to is, if you will, the theory of moral sentiments. The idea that we're not going to be able to achieve any of our goals unless there is a substrata of community and dignity afforded from each to each in a mutual, literally a social contract, but not from the government to the people, but from each individual to every other individual in order to solve our problems. We have to actually tolerate and get along with each other.
Finally, let's imagine 2045. You're too smart a guy to come up with predictions. So let me ask you 2 or 3 ending questions, and perhaps very brief answers, Ken. In 2045, will we have reached AGI?
I don't think AGI is possible. If you want AGI, what G is it going to be? Is it going to be Mother Teresa or is it going to be Adolf Hitler? Choose one. Right? Actually, you're going to get them all. So you're going to have to live with the Hitler AI as well as the Mother Teresa AI. This is the whole framing is just wrong. AI, we already have superintelligence. We've had it since we've had computers that were faster than the human mind. So the idea of machine consciousness is ridiculous. It'll be the simulacrum, the mimicry of consciousness, but it won't be consciousness because it's not adamant. It doesn't respond to the same features of life as all life does, because we have this spark of life. So I don't think AGI will be there, but I think the conversation will mature closer to what I'm saying than to what's being said today.
So no artificial general intelligence by 2045. What about less bile in 2045?
Hard to say. Look, we'll have AI that will supersede us thousands-fold, millions-fold. So it won't be the wrong question. So let me ask you: Elon Musk's rockets, how many horsepower is it? You'd be like, well, are we really going to measure the thrust of a rocket that goes into space through the base atomic unit of the horse for horsepower? It made sense when you had the early automobiles to use horsepower as the unit of measure, but for certain things that's ridiculous if you have a space probe that's going at like the Concorde. So likewise, that's my point on AGI. That we're not going to base it on the human intelligence and try to mimic it as the base unit. We will have an AI that will be able to do things million-folds more complex and better and elaborate, in how we will define elaborate probably in new ways as well than we can do today. So I don't want to be an AI skeptic. So it's not that we won't have AGI, but we won't be using the G measured versus the the human being, just like no one talks about the Turing test anymore, because we realize it's the wrong standard, it's the wrong test. Okay, less bile, the biliousness of the world. I don't know. I mean, you could also imagine a world in which we have to tolerate it and live with it. But that would. But I think we will not be able to solve many of our problems.
So, but you're jumping around on this. Yes,
Yeah.
more or less by 2045, or the same amount.
More, I don't see it being fixed.
And what about in 2045, big tech? Will it got even bigger? I mean, it seems as if the bigger players now are controlling all of AI, from Google, in particular, Amazon, OpenAI, which is very close.
Smaller. History of government state intervention into the economy is one of freeing up markets, ultimately freeing up markets. They did it with Standard Oil a century ago. They will do it with big tech again. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. You'll have new, just as AT&T had to create something in the early 1900s.
Baby bells.
Well, first was the Kingsbury Commitments, which allowed them to enable, they were allowed to be a monopoly. It was about 1910 or so. They were allowed to be a monopoly, but they had to have universal service as the payoff, as the trade-off, which basically meant they were going to guarantee everyone a line into their home at a certain basic level of standards and a low fee in order to make basic phone calls. Okay, and it was great for the enfranchisement of the telephone everywhere in the United States. In other countries, it was actually just monopoly, but it was a government-regulated monopoly, and people were ratepayers, they were not customers. But then it turns out the baby bells, and we freed that. Story of IBM, Whole Earth Machines, International Business Machines, IBM then being regulated. The regulatory mechanism wasn't as dramatic as they would claim, but the point is that it feared them into entering into new markets, and so other companies would go into it, and so we would create a more vibrant IT sector. So today's big tech will change. I don't think we will have big tech anymore. We will have a better playing field in certain domains. Consumer internet is one example, but I think we will have new tech dominant giants who then will be overthrown as well. Ever thus.
And finally, Ken, what about government? Huge distrust of government. People talk about a crisis of legitimacy of the state, the withering of the state in the US in some ways. People aren't paying their taxes. Is generally government going to be more or less credible in 2045 than it is in 2025?
I think government will be more credible in 2045 because it will be smaller in 2045. The government that everyone is anchored, has an anchoring bias on the today. So they think that what exists at in any moment of time is all that has ever existed. They would be surprised to know that the state 110 years ago, 120 years ago, looked vastly different than it does today. As one example, in terms of the number of employees, we probably have 10 times the number of state employees today than we did back in 1910. It was the beginning of World War I that created the modern state. The passport didn't exist until World War I. The federal income taxes in many places didn't exist until the 1800s, or the 1900s. So the state has sort of mushroomed in the 20th century, and I think there's lots of elements of it that are very positive. The deep state is largely a good thing. It gets you a vaccine to save your life that popped into your arm. However, there are features of the state that are not necessary, that you actually want to give back to communities and to individuals. And so hairdressers in the United States need to be licensed. That seems to me a little bit of an overreach. So I think that we will have a stronger and better and more respected state in 2045, but it'll be a smaller state.
Bold statements about the future for 2045 from Ken Cukier, what are you? The assistant to the assistant editor at special editor at The Economist.
Funny enough, that is exactly my title.
I think by 2045, my prediction is Ken Cukier will not only be the editor, probably own The Economist.
No, hardly. I've not taken that.
We will reassemble in 20 years' time, Ken, to see how accurate your predictions were. As always, a pleasure and an honor.
Let's reassemble on Mars.
And we will reassemble on Mars. Yeah, we didn't even talk about Mars. Happy New Year, healthy New Year, Ken, and we will certainly talk before 2045. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Can I step on the scene? I'm ready to attack. Andrew fills you with